good morning. We're going to talk today about World War I. Now, through your career as a student, you will learn quite a bit more about World War I. In 5th grade, we only focus on America's involvement in World War I. To understand America's involvement, though, we have to understand what caused this war. What were the events that led to World War I? The war began in Europe and went on for several years before America was involved. There were several things happening in Europe before the war that led to the start of World War I. One issue is called militarism, and that's when countries are building up their militaries for protection. They create huge armies that are ready to fight at any point. If a country is not prepared for war, they're less likely to get involved. So all of these countries had armies that were ready to go. Another issue is the idea of nationalism, and this is a deep sense of pride in your country. I'm not talking about being patriotic. I'm talking about a pride that is so extreme that people felt like their countries should control or run other countries. Another issue is called imperialism. And this is when you're trying to add colonies or add other places to control to your country. This was happening throughout Europe at this time. One country was looking to take over another country in order to grow. Then we had the issue of alliances. And an alliance is a union formed between countries. So in the case of World War I, when one country decided to enter the war, their allies also had to enter. Then the final event that happened that just was, if you use the expression, the straw that broke the camel's back, was the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. Archduke Ferdinand was royalty. He was riding in a car with his new wife and unfortunately was assassinated. At that point, he was from Austria-Hungary, and at that point they declared war on Serbia. The person that killed him was from Serbia. So at this point, it's just like dominoes. Have you ever seen dominoes when one gets knocked down, it knocks the next and the next and the next? So these events in Europe were like dominoes that led to the beginning of World War I. During World War I, you had two sides. We're going to call them the Central Powers, and there are going to be other countries that are involved on either side, but for the sake of our lessons, we're just going to focus on a few. So you had the Central Powers, who then included Germany, Austria-Hungary, which was where the Archduke was from, and the Ottoman Empire. We're also going to have the Allied powers, which by the end of the war consisted of many countries. You had France, Great Britain, Russia, and this is the side that the United States is going to be on once they enter the war. Now, America wanted to remain neutral, and neutral is when you don't take either side. The president at the time was a man named Woodrow Wilson, as you can see here in his picture, and he did not want America to get involved in this war. He felt it was our role to stay out of the war. However, America and Great Britain were good friends. Great Britain was involved in the war, and so America was sending supplies to Great Britain. America was sending most of the supplies by boat, large boats at the time. Now Germany, who was on the other side in the Central Powers, was trying to stop Great Britain from getting supplies, and they would take any measures necessary to prevent Great Britain from getting things that they needed. And one of those steps was sinking ships. Germany had a new technology, boats called German U-boats, and they were attacking ships that were getting near Great Britain. One of these ships was the RMS Lusitania. Now, how does this affect the United States? Well, the United States had 128 Americans on board the ship when it was attacked. So after the sinking of the Lusitania, President Woodrow Wilson knew that America had to get into World War I. He also had the support of the American people who felt like once the ship had been attacked with Americans on board, that America must get involved. So America enters the war. Now, the countries in Europe had been fighting for quite some time now, and so they were running low on supplies. They were tired. America comes in and offers a fresh set of soldiers and a lot of supplies. In all, America sent over 4 million troops to World War I, and many, 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 many supplies. World War I was considered the first modern war. Warfare changed quite a bit during World War I. Here's some new technology that was involved in World War I. Here you see a picture of 2 soldiers and their horse, and they're all wearing a gas mask. Poison gas was introduced and used during this war, and so soldiers always had to have their gas masks ready to protect them from these harmful gases. Machine guns were also introduced. Grenades could be thrown. This changed the way people fought. And then the airplanes. We've learned that Orville and Wilbur Wright had their first flight. Can you imagine what they would have thought if they knew their wonderful invention was going to be used in war? Airplanes were not used in quite the same way in World War I as in World War II. In World War I, they were still very new, and so a lot of the times they were used for spy missions, for surveillance. We're going to learn later in World War II that they became weapons. So these new technologies made war much more deadly. This was, at this point, the most deadly war to date. Because of these new technologies, the way war was fought was different in World War I. Here you can see they just look like lines, but this is the view from an airplane, and these are trenches. The men fought in trenches, and they were holes dug in the ground 6 to 10 feet deep. They would stand in these and be able to fight. The area between the trenches was called no man's land, and they were able to throw grenades into these. They were able to use their machine guns. Unfortunately, the trenches were very, very close quarters. And if you think now, the quarantine and the coronavirus that we have been involved in, there was another disease in that during World War I called the Spanish flu. And a lot of men in these trenches caught this disease and other diseases from being around one another. So life for a soldier was very, very miserable, very dangerous during World War I, and it just created a very, very sad environment. What were Americans doing at home? Americans felt very patriotic during World War I. Many Americans went to work in factories. Factories that had been used to make other things were now all of a sudden used to manufacture supplies being sent overseas. So Americans at home felt like they were helping the soldiers that were fighting in Europe. Many Americans also planted victory gardens. These were gardens planted at home where they could grow their own food. The more food Americans grew, the less they had to buy in stores, and the food from the stores they were able to ship that food to the soldiers. This was another way Americans felt that they were doing their part for the war effort. Americans were very proud of the men fighting overseas, and they wanted to help in any way that they could. How does the war end? Well, the war ends on what we call Armistice Day, and we celebrate that on Veterans Day. The 11th month, the 11th day, so November the 11th, at 11 a.m. The fighting stopped. The Allied powers are victorious. They win the war. And so when wars end, we have to have what is called a treaty, and a treaty ends or lays out the different things that are going to have to happen because of the war. Now, the Treaty of Versailles is signed in 1919 at a beautiful palace called the Palace of Versailles. And it was a peace agreement. But as part of this agreement, Germany was held responsible for the war, and they had to pay penalties. We're going to learn later this treaty helped set the groundwork for World War II. Woodrow Wilson, this was not the agreement he was hoping for. He had created a plan called the 14 Points, and he also worked for the creation of the League of Nations. The League of Nations was created with the Treaty of Versailles, and it was sort of an organization of the different countries where they could come together and work peacefully to prevent further wars. Unfortunately, we know this was not the case, and World War II is only 2 decades later. So World War II was a large war. America's part in it was a little bit smaller than other places, but America stepped in and helped the Allied powers become victorious.